Good morning, everybody, or at least good morning from where I'm at. Wishing you all an early Shabbat Shalom. I'm excited that we get to study some Torah together. So just a little bit of an overview about what we're doing today, what we're looking at together. We're in Parashat Toldot, right? We are in sort of the thick of it, in the Genesis narrative, in the narrative of Breshit, the book of Genesis, sort of watching the unfolding family drama, right, of Judaism and monotheism's first family. We've moved sort of through the narrative of Abraham and Sarah, and today we're going to be spending some time with the character of Rivka, or Rebecca, sort of our second matriarch. A couple of notes. I would love to hear people's voices other than mine, and also we are a lot of people sharing a Zoom space today. So I will give people a heads up, like if you want to read or share a comment and discussion out loud, like feel free to wave or use the raise hand function. I will also say I know this varies from like facilitator, but the chat is your friend, at least while I am on this Zoom with you. Please, please, please. I have loved, especially during text studies, watching sort of the chat become its own sort of running commentary, right, on whatever we're talking about. So I tend to like talk incomplete sentences or paragraphs. If you like are nervous about interrupting or want to, add something, an insight, please drop it in the chat. And some of them will like call on folks also to share these like very juicy insights. So I think the Sefaria source sheet is in our chat already. I'll let people take a moment to open that up separately in your screen if you want to. I'll also share my screen in a minute. But we are going to start right at the beginning of the Parsha with Isaac and Rebecca. I'm going to share. So we'll be starting with Genesis 25. But would anybody like to read just this section? We can sort of ground ourselves in the shot, the plain text of the Parsha. Yeah, Sherry. Sherry, you're not off of mute. There you go.
Isaac was 40 years old when he took to wife Rebecca, daughter of Bethuel and Aramean of Paddan Aram, sister of Laban of Aramean. Forgive me, everybody. Isaac pleaded with God before his wife because she was barren, and the God responded to his plea, and his wife Rebecca conceived. But the children struggled in her womb, and she said, "If so, why do I exist?" She went to inquire of God, and God answered her, "Two nations are in your womb, two separate peoples shall issue from your body. One people shall be mightier than the other, and the other shall serve the younger."
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Sherry. And thank you for struggling with all of those place names. I put you on the spot there with that opening verse that you did beautifully, right? So just to summarize what we just read together, right? This is sort of, again, the opening thrust of our Parsha of what's going on. Isaac, Yitzhak, the patriarch, sort of our second generation after Abraham, is 40 years old. And we left in the translation in English, it's kind of funny, like took to wife, lakach. He acquired for a wife, but we're going to look at some interesting things that are done with that word of like taking or acquisition, what it means to take a partner. Sometimes it can refer to an unequal hierarchy that is unfortunately the norm for biblical marriage. Thank God not in our world. But it also is going to be sort of a key to open up a lot of interesting interpretation. So we have Isaac and Rebecca for the first time, and like many, many, many couples in our tradition, they are struggling with infertility. This is, an experience that is not, I think, unique in our world and is also not unknown. It's really part and parcel of the biblical narrative, the struggle to conceive and to create life, and sort of the existential anxiety that can come along with it. So we have Isaac who's pleading with God. Again, another weird word sort of before his wife. Linoach, linocha. It's not like on behalf of, it's not like for, it's a funny, I want to flag that for people, that it's funny in the English, it's also funny in the Hebrew, of like what exactly Isaac is doing in relationship to Rebecca with this prayer, and that she conceives. And it's not over. It's not like, amazing, we're pregnant, happy, move on, right? The struggle continues. These fetuses are nuts. They're like constantly fighting. I didn't bring all the midrashim, but there are all these stories in our tradition about like what Rebecca's experience of pregnancy is like, how difficult it was, that these babies that grow up to be Jacob and Esau are fighting, or they're like kicking each other based on who is in proximity either to their mother or the location that they're in. So, right, we have this woman who has struggled with infertility, who has a very kind of distinct relationship with her husband, who now is pregnant, but dealing with these questions of sort of basic, why am I on this planet? Why do I exist? What is my purpose? Sort of grounding us. This is our like big introduction to Rebecca's, not her narrative and appearance in the Bible, but how she thinks about herself. Where she's asking this question and she's asking God, inquires of God, why on earth am I, why do I have to deal with this? Like, didn't we already do the hard part? Apparently not. We're still here, and now these two fetuses are in a fight all of the time to the point where it's quite painful. I just would love to hear either if one or two people want to come off mute or in the chat other reactions to this text. And I'm seeing in the chat too, weird translation, the God. Yes, I'm so sorry. So I was trying to remove some of the hierarchical language that the other translations use for God. So sometimes it says like the Lord, what we would say maybe Adonai in a prayer context, Adoshem, Hashem, versus like Yud He Vav He, the Tetragrammaton insertions there. So that's just my technical error. It's just God. I apologize. Sheila, I see that you have a question in the chat. Would you be willing to come off of mute and explain it a little bit more?
No, I think what I'm getting from this is that back in the day, that women would feel that their purpose on earth is to have children. And I think nowadays in our world, some women just do not have children, that we no longer feel that our role as a woman is just to have children. We have another purpose, perhaps. Or am I taking this the wrong way?
I don't think you're taking it the wrong way. I think that that's maybe an assumption that the text is trying to subvert a little bit, right? That like Rebecca's in this position where, you know, maybe on paper, right? She's like checked the box. There was an anxiety about her ability to conceive. She got pregnant, but actually she's in that moment of like, I'm hesitant to use the word fulfillment. I'm very conscious of like my own both experiences with infertility and role as a woman living in 2021, right? But she's at this moment maybe that like the society around her might cast as like an apex experience of womanhood or femininity, and she's still having this existential anxiety. I think that you're exactly right. The text is sort of like subverting that idea to say, she's like, is this really what this is all about, or is this what it's for? I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I think what we're going to look at a couple of these midrashim together, these sort of classical interpretations of this like very tricky text, starts to unearth actually what is Rivka all about? What is Rebecca's story, and who is she? I know that sometimes I come to, especially the Genesis narrative, but our text in general, with an expectation that women are somehow going to be either placed in the secondary category or less than, or at least that the hierarchy is going to be really present. And what I think is fascinating about Rivka, and what I'm so excited to spend some time thinking about today, is the way in which in some ways Isaac actually moves to the background in this parsha. And Rebecca in some ways is in more of the power role. She's not a patriarch, and then she's not male, but we're going to look at ways in which Rebecca through the Midrashim is set up to be the nation builder, and a prophet in a way actually that her spouse really is not. In some places they have this like, again, I'm hesitant to say anything's equal in a society that's so structured like the biblical narrative, but she's owning her power in a way that is not available to many, many women within the biblical narrative. So we're going to move on. The first thing I want to look at, well, first, Nina, I see your hand. So before we move on, Nina, one comment, and then I want to look at Rebecca's relationship to place.
Sure. I mean, it actually echoes what you just said, which is that if you read God's answer to her, what's being conferred on her is that she is the source of this extraordinary power. I mean, she is a nation creator and a nation builder, and so, and not just a sort of passive receptacle, that she's the only person who can do that. She's the only sort of, not sort of, but actual human who can bring life into the world that way and be the source of like future generations. So I think it is a sort of powerful description of her role and her purpose, if we want to use that language.
Beautiful. Thank you. So I would love for people to like pop into the chat really quick, and I'll take us out of the source sheet for a second. What do we already know about Mount Moriah or Moriah? Are we familiar with this place? I said Mount Moriah. Maybe you're thinking, yeah, the Akedah, Carol, exactly. Some people know that is also totally fine. Yes. So Moriah or Mount Moriah is the source of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. Mount Moriah is sort of the place of this apex, near human sacrifice, the great trial of Abraham. Joel, I'm not familiar with like the 3 great questions that you're referencing. Could you explain that a little bit more in the chat? But yes, okay, so like it's both physically very, very high, and it's a moment of high drama. You know that there's going to be intensity if something in the biblical narrative is happening at Har Moriah. So I'm going to jump back in, and if somebody would like to read the English, that would be amazing. So this is from Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, which is an 8th or 9th century midrash, quite late in our classical canon of midrash. I'm seeing Beat Mia's hand, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. Would you correct me when you come off of mute?
Yes, it's Bamaya, like Haya.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Bamaya, you want to read for us?
Yes, Rabbi Yehuda said, Rebecca had been unable to conceive for 20 years. After 20 years, Isaac took Rebecca and went with her to Mount Moriah, to the place where he had been bound, and he prayed for her pregnancy, and the Holy One, blessed be he, was entreated of him, as it is said, and Isaac pleaded with Adonai.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. All right, so we have, right, they go back to this place. This is not in the biblical pshat, right, that they go, that when Isaac is pleading on behalf of Rebecca, that he goes to Har Moriah. But I want us to think for a minute, why might that be a significant place? What is it about his own experience at Mount Moriah, at Har Moriah, that brings Isaac to be like, oh, if I'm going to have a huge request of God, if I have an existential question, this is the spot. Because I think there's a good argument to be made, and in some reasons it's very weird, right? That this man would like bring his wife and return to the site of like all of his childhood trauma to ask this question. Oh, I'm loving Nina. I see in the chat, vulnerability, covenant, fear. Yeah, he almost died. It was a place, you're right, where not only was he almost sacrificed, but also he was saved. So maybe, yeah, there's a sense of catharsis. It's not the site of the burning bush, Julie, but it's, yeah, kind of this like, there's a lot going on here. It's juicy. Yeah, it's a place of life. He's saved. He encountered God. Martha and Cheryl, I see you guys have questions or things you want to add. Martha, I can see that you're talking, but I think we have to take you off of mute. So why don't you share?
Okay. Isn't it where Ishmael lived? Moriah? Was Ishmael living there? Because I think he went to live near his brother.
I believe they go a little farther south when
okay.
they together, away from the mountain. But you're right in that it's a significant place, right in the Isaac, Ishmael, Abraham sort of triangle of drama that we read only a few chapters before.
But the other interesting thing about dates is that it says that Isaac was 40 years old when he met Rivka, and when and then it says that he was married for 20 years, so that means he was 60 years old when he was asking God for a child. I'm confused about the dates, because also something else. Isaac was 36 years old when when the Akedah. People tend to think that he was a little child, but he was 36.
So I think you're picking up on something that we're going to talk about later, which is that like biblical math and rabbinic math is almost never clear. I think our tradition plays actually with numbers and with math. You're right. We have a tradition of Isaac being quite young at the Akedah. We have another tradition, a different way of counting and analyzing the narrative that says he's 36 years old. You're right. There is a way to read this to where like this is in recent memory. Or they could be having, tried to have a kid for 20 years and they're coming back to return to this place. It sounds like we're having a little bit of issues with the closed captioning. I just wanted to give you a heads up, Julie, in case you weren't seeing that in the chat. But I love this also too. Yeah, like maybe he's not traumatized, but this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. He witnessed a miracle. It's also a site of blessing for Abraham. Yes. Cheryl, you wanted to add something?
Well, it's that he's looking for a miracle, and that's where he saw a miracle happen. It was a very scary place for him, and it was probably very hard for him to go back there, but he knows that if any place can be the place where their prayer can be answered, that could be the place where it could happen.
Absolutely, yeah. That it's this apex place. It's a place that you go to talk to God, whether it's a reconciling or a very frightening encounter. Oh my gosh, I'm loving all of these like very juicy insights that all of you are bringing. There's one other element to Har Moriah that I want to share this morning, to what it might mean for Rebecca and Isaac to go together. So I'll read these two sources real quick and we can start to unpack them. But this is, the first is the Abraham narrative that we've been discussing from Genesis, and then a second midrash about what happens when they go up to the mountain. So in Genesis 22, sometimes afterward, God put Abraham to the test. God said to him, Abraham, and he answered, Hineni, here I am. And God said, take your son, your only one. Right? It says in the Hebrew, Kachna et bincha et yachidcha asher achavta et yitzak. God's super specific here. Take your child, your only one, Isaac, who you love dearly, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as an offering on one of these heights that I'm going to point out to you. There's something about this moment also that even though it's like, it's pretty perverse, right? Like that Abraham at least interprets, right? We have a tradition that like maybe he's being ordered directly. Maybe what we're understanding from the biblical text is Abraham's interpretation of this command. But there's something about the pain point of the potential sacrifice of Isaac that's really rooted in the depth of his relationship with his father. That he is, his father's like, Yechidcha, the one that you love, your only one, even though we know that Abraham has two sons. That there's this love that also is present at Har Moriah. And similarly, we have in Breshit Rabbah, which is sort of this like massive, the expanded universe of Breshit, of Genesis, and the Midrash. We say, when Isaac pleaded with God before his wife, this word, I'm going to point it out in the Hebrew a little bit if we can see it, the nocha, right? Before his wife. It's kind of funny. It can mean opposite or beside. So Genesis Rabbah interprets this kind of funky word in this way to say that Isaac prostrated in one place and Rebekah prostrated there too. And he said, Master of the world, may all the children that you give me come from this righteous woman. Hatzedeket, Hazo, this specific person who I acknowledge is righteous. And then she said, thusly, may all the future children that you give me, God, come from this righteous man. Hatzadik Hazeh. They've set up something that's totally different than we see in any of the marriages in this biblical family before or after. This generation is incredibly unique because of this kind of reciprocity. And it's also a little bit sneaky of a power move, I think, on Rebecca's behalf that the Midrash is setting up here, right? She's also binding Isaac in a kind of exclusivity that is not available to any other biblical woman, any other matriarch especially, right? To say, to basically to bring Isaac to this site of catharsis, yes, Nina, mutuality, and to say our relationship is going to look different. And this moment of struggle and of infertility, rather than being an opening up of rivalry and pain points, the way it might be with Abraham and Sarah and Hagar, or later with Jacob and Leah and Rachel, if we're familiar with those narratives, right? Kind of this like unstable triangle of relationships as a result of infertility and jealousy. To say in this moment, when we're at our most vulnerable, in our most vulnerable space, this place where you almost died, we're going to invest really deeply in a totally different kind of dynamic, right? We're going to invest really deeply in mutuality and actually pray to God to help us commit to this kind of mutuality. Yeah, I'm seeing the thing. Yeah, pun intentionally. Yeah, exactly. I'm intentionally punning using the word binding. Nina, also generosity. Yeah. Oh, Carol, I'm seeing in the chat. It's hard for you to understand why Isaac would pray to God, because God commanded this sacrifice, that this kind of unfathomable anger. Yeah, and I'm also seeing in the chat exactly that's like our tradition is like disputes it. We have different sources going back and forth whether or not God actually is demanding the sacrifice of Isaac, or whether Abraham just understood it that way, and maybe it was a disagreement. But regardless, right? This tremendous pain, this catharsis, the last minute save is now this site of a totally opposite kind of relationship. Yes, Leslie, I'm seeing, yeah, like a bookend, of the sota even. Oh my gosh, okay, I could get on a long track. A lot of my academic work is about the sota. Please send me a DM so we could talk more about it. But Wendy, I'm seeing your hand and we haven't heard your voice yet.
Hi, thank you, Rabbi. I was wondering, I see the Mount Moriah slightly differently, the experience of the Akedah, because we know that there were other gods that other people believed in. And Abraham and Isaac are being told there's only one God and follow this one God. And we know that at that time, there were other gods that did require sacrifices of people. But here is this experience where they believed in one God. Maybe they were thinking, okay, this God is going to require this sacrifice, but at the last minute saves Isaac. And so it almost is proof that this is a benevolent God. So I know that in our society, we think of it as a horrible thing that God tried to do to Abraham and tested, but in relativity to the other gods that were requiring sacrifices, this may have been an act of supreme benevolence. And so for Isaac to return with Rebekah to this space where God saved him, because other gods wouldn't have, it may be a special and kind experience in Isaac's mind compared to what else was going on in society at that time.
That's a beautiful read. Yeah, and I think maybe even speaking to that, the idea that they would come and say, this is the spot, where children maybe are threatened and saved a generation ago, and we have no child. And we're coming to this spot. Like, this also is a spot that is generative of life in some way. I want to start thinking about other pieces of Rebecca's identity, but one other thing I want to hold on to as we move through is that while the texts are crediting Isaac also with them going, I want us to leave open the possibility that he may not have made the decision to go to Har Moriah. I think that there's an openness a little bit in the text for us to wonder about what was this marital dynamic like. Also, if Rivka insisted oh no, we're going, that perhaps it was not even Isaac's idea. He doesn't often go to Har Moriah willingly. He often is taken there by someone else. And while our text often doesn't allow that kind of direct agency there in the text, I want to leave us with a whisper of that possibility as we look at our sources. So we've established already Rebecca, a powerful person, someone who also has an association. He does not go there often. I don't think he likes it there. Um, looking at the chat, but someone who is associated then with this place of sacrifice, of test, and of spiritual intensity. But Rebecca is also credited with two qualities in the Midrash that are often seen as more masculine roles among the other patriarchs, and that's of nation building and being a prophet. So I want to look a little bit at like Rebecca both as an echo of Abraham in our last couple minutes together, and Rebecca as a precursor of Moses, and the way in which she becomes this linchpin between our other sort of like founding icons of monotheism and of Judaism. So I'm going to share us back into chat. I just want to make sure that yes, we're the right place on the source sheet before I do it. Beautiful. So I'll read the first text, but if somebody wants to get ready to read the Midrash after this, that would be great. So steel yourselves if you're ready to be called on to offer to read. So this is again back in Genesis 22. Y'all are being very patient as we're jumping all around Genesis. The angel of God called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, "By myself I swear," God declares, "because you have done this and you have not withheld your son, your favored one, I will bestow my blessing upon you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars of heaven and the sands on the seashore." Right? I imagine that some of us are familiar with this language, that as numerous as the stars in the sky or the sand in the sea. This is the blessing that Abraham receives from God, or from the angel on behalf of God, right after Isaac is saved. But that Abraham is endowed with this blessing of nation building. And if we think back to our Genesis text, right, what God says to Rebecca when she goes like, "Lama anochi," why do I exist? God says there's two nations inside of you. This language, so I want us to think as we read this Midrash together about the language of nation building and who is blessed with what kind of capacity, not just to have a child, but to build a nation, a people. So if somebody wants to raise their hand and read from Breshit Rabbah for us, that would be fantastic. Maybe somebody we haven't heard from yet.
Mina, did you want to read?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful, please.
Are
We're
we
starting
at
to say in the name of Rabbi.
I gotta go down. There it is. I just want to go down. Yeah, where we going? Here we are.
Here, I've scrolled it up. Is that helpful?
You got me? Yeah, thank you. It was taught in the name of Rabbi Neshima that Rebecca was worthy of having all 12 tribes descended from her. That is written. And Ionea said to her, "There are two nations in your womb. There are two people shall issue from your body." That is 4.
Right, beautiful. This is actually a very, very long text, so I only brought a little bit of it. But we were talking earlier about rabbinic math and the ways in which the rabbis of the Midrash use the plain text of the Torah, right, to start doing a lot of fun math tricks. That they say, so Rebecca is told, I'll scroll up again, right? Sorry if it zooms by really fast. 2 nations are in your womb, 2 separate people will issue through your body. And the rabbi starts saying, that's not just Jacob and Esau, but they start counting, right? Because she's not only the mother of Jacob, or Jacob Israel, right? Where we get the 12 tribes of Israel, the father of the 12 tribes. She's the grandmother of the 12 tribes. And so the rabbis are saying we shouldn't just credit Jacob, Yaakov, Yisrael, but rather credit Rebecca as the genesis point of the 12 tribes. So they start counting. They say, oh, the 2 nations in your womb, that's 2. The 2 separate people, that's not referring back to those same 2 twins. That's more. And then they go through the text for quite a while, like picking out and basically coming up with a numeric justification to say there are 12 tribes. But I want us to think, what might the rabbis be asking us to think about when they're setting up Rebecca not just as a mother, but as a nation builder? What's different about being a mom or being a parent versus being the progenitor of a nation or a whole group? Seeing people in the chat. Future generations, also merit, yes. Yeah, when we credit someone with being kind of a founder, it's a totally different level of kavod, of honor, and of merit, right? Than like being a parent is a tremendous job and an incredible thing. And I think we should give more credit to people who do anything in the raising and taking care of children. But the push up, yeah, maybe the ability to speak directly to God. Nina, can you write more in the chat about this idea of intimacy versus generality? But yeah, much more emphasis on the future, that like there's something about Rebecca's family building and people building where it's like she's not just focused maybe, or she's not just contextualized in a family unit. Rebecca and God are playing a long game, is what the rabbis are saying. They're part of something really, really big. More responsibility. Yes, I'm seeing some things about Rebecca's speaking directly to God. That's where we're going. So hold on there. But yeah, like this connection to future generations, right? She's set up not just like a matriarch in the way we might typically think of a matriarch, but really she's almost like a female patriarch rather than a matriarch, if that makes sense. She's being put on this level of not just kavod, not just respect, but power also. It's an intensely powerful place. Maybe it's always hearkening, back to Eve, the mother of all, this idea of like a universal mother. Yes, Wendy even pointing out, right, yes, the promise and the communication is not happening between Isaac and God. Isaac may be praying to God on behalf of, or opposite, right, Rebecca, but it's Rebecca who gets the direct download of this is what's going on. Absolutely. Sheila and Cheryl, I see your hands are raised. We hear from Cheryl and then from Sheila. Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking about how, when you raise children, you hope and you pray for them to grow up and have a good life. And there's a prayer that's said over an infant about raising them to good deeds and chuppah and all these things like that. And you're praying that they will grow up and have all those things, and that they will go to college and get a good job and get married. But when you're told that this baby that's not even born yet is going to be the parent of nations, you know already that you don't have to worry that this kid is going to grow up. That part is already decided for you. So there's already a little bit of a different thinking in the back of your head. You don't necessarily treat the kid different, but you don't necessarily have exactly the same fears that you have as your child is growing up. And let's say your kid gets pneumonia or whatever. You don't have the same kinds of things going through your head that you might. And I just have to mention that 2 months ago, my son and his wife had twins, which is very fitting right now. And it actually has opened my eyes a lot to, how I'm thinking about the world. And this Torah portion is kind of just thinking about this whole thing of twins.
Absolutely. Yes, and something that you were saying, Cheryl, that I didn't even think about, I think, until you were speaking, is what kind of security also to be told that, particularly in the ancient world, that your children will survive. That Rebecca has a tremendous gift, and that she has a prophetic guarantee also that like her children are born into conflict, right? She's told they're going to fight, they're going to try to rule over each other, but not only will they survive, they'll represent and found two different peoples. this sort of like guaranteed, not just like continuity of her family, but also the like personal maternal anxiety, right? Of like, will my babies make it? Are secure. And she has that security in a way that Hagar certainly does not have a generation before, right? When she thinks Ishmael might die in the desert, that Sarah certainly doesn't have before. And she's like, my husband is taking my babies off to the mountain and I don't know what's going on, right? Or that Abraham has. Rebecca is sort of this first person that has that security. Or even if we think farther back, people were talking about Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, who their children murder each other. That there's a really sacred gift of security, even with the guarantee of conflict that Rivka is receiving here. Sheila, I know you've had your hand up for a minute. Do you want to share, and then we can read our last text together?
I was just curious about, someone mentioned the family of Lot, that Rebecca was associated with the family of Lot. So how did they connect with each other?
They are all cousins, is the short answer. I encourage you to look back in Genesis. They spell it all out that like Lot is a nephew of Abraham, and then they're also, right, related to Laban, the Aramean, who we read about at the beginning of this parsha, Bethuel, that this whole sort of complicated family is being taken out of the land where they normally reside and all moving in at different stages to Eretz Yisrael together at different stages. So I want us to also think about, I promised we would get here in our last few minutes, Rebecca as prophet. We already talked about the fact that she gets this direct answer from God, but I want to think back to this line in Genesis 25, right? The children struggled in her womb, and she said, if so, why do I exist? The Hebrew here is so like beautifully poetic. Im ken lama ze anochi. If this is going on, like why do I exist? Why am I here? This is the same word, anochi, right? That like opens up the 10 Commandments. That's how like God introduces it. It's a really weighty existential pronoun. Lama anochi. And she goes to inquire of God. Lidrosh et Hashem. There is really, I think, only one other person, at least that I know of. The Torah is huge. I could be wrong. Who uses this phrase of lidrosh et Hashem, right? It's actually the same root as the word midrash, to demand, to inquire, to investigate. This is not a pleading with God. She's demanding. She's like pulling something out from the divine. And so we see it also with Moses, actually. When Moses is being counseled by his father-in-law, Yitro, and Jethro's like, why do you, like, you're very overwhelmed. You need to delegate. One of the things that Moses brings up, he says, it's because people come to me to lidrosh Elohim, to inquire of God. This same word, this function that Moses provides for the entire people in the desert, Rebecca just does. She doesn't ask for permission. She just lidrosh et Hashem. She goes and she asks and she demands an answer. That there's something about this that signifies a prophetic power and a really different kind of relationship to demand answers of God. This is not a prayer of intercession. Like we said, it's not a pleading. But I'm curious, what might this say, and please go ahead, populate the chat, like about our understanding of what it means to be a prophet, or what it means to be as a person with maybe less societal agency, but to claim agency before God in this way. To demand, to lidrosh, to inquire, and really expect an answer. Yeah, I'm saying courage, almost like a proto-feminism. Yeah, her approach to God versus Hannah's in the book of Samuel. Absolutely. Hannah, who pours out her heart, but like silently, right? Like people think at the temple that Hannah is drunk because of how she's like carrying on. And Hannah's also comes with a lot of praise. It's a really hierarchical relationship too, right? Hannah refers to herself, as like the handmaiden of God versus Rivka's kind of showing up like, chop chop, I have questions. They are existential in nature. I need an answer. And she gets it. Ooh, I love this identity too. Perhaps also an opportunity for greater faithfulness to ask, with bitachon, with amunah, with faith that like, of course I'm going to get an answer. There's a trust thing here. yes, that Judaism encourages us to talk directly to God all the time. But there's something about this idea of lidroshing God, right? To demand or to inquire, that has with it also like a prophetic resonance. That you're inquiring and getting like, not just, oh, will my prayers be answered, but like I'm getting, again, that like direct data download from the Holy One of Blessing. And it's still being done with devotion. Oh, yes, I love this, Leslie. The idea of Rebecca and God studying Torah together, right? Like drashing, like midrash, sermonizing or investigating that, like, let's look at the text of my life and help me figure out an answer. They're in chavruta. Ah, this is so beautiful. Yes, that like there's something about this prophetic role that means being God's chavruta and like sitting with a kind of mutuality with God. That same mutuality she's developing with Isaac, she also is developing with God. In our last 2 minutes, I want to leave us with this like last comment from Breshit Rabbah that I think is so beautiful about Rebecca and her specific role, both as matriarch, as female nation builder, and as prophet. Would somebody like to come off of mute and read it? But Maya, I see your hand up. Would you like to read?
Sure. Rabbi Haggai said in the name of Rabbi Isaac, the matriarchs were all prophets, and Rebecca was distinguished among the matriarchs.
Beautiful. Thank you. So there's something that Rebecca has that is just like a little bit extra, a little bit more. She stands out, right? There's something about this whole generation of Isaac and Rebecca where all of the biblical expectations that like showed up a generation before and are going to show up again, like these family dynamics don't go away. But there's something about Isaac and Rebecca particularly, that allow them to almost be outside of, at least for a little while, right? Then they have their kids and the kids start fighting and we go back to the same cycle or a very similar one. But there's something about Rebecca that allows her to stand outside of these family dynamics in a really powerful way. Oh, I love this, Liz. Yeah. That Isaac actually maybe embraces this mutuality too. We could call it a yielding quality. I really like that language. Or even just like his ability to share. We have a patriarch who knows how to share the limelight and share relationship. Yeah, and lets his life partner really, really shine. But yeah, there's something about Rebecca that allows her to be like the mother of myriads, right? There's something that allows her to be this huge figure that while it doesn't always, it sort of slips and slides out of the biblical text, the Midrash really pushes that there's something about Rivka that we need to be paying attention to. There's something about Rivka that tells us a lot about the potential of Havrutaing with God, of building a nation, of being a people, that we have this other figure who in some ways subverts her entire context, but makes space for, I think, a whole other expression of what it means to be in devotion with God, what it means to be in relationship, what it means to also reckon with our own family dynamics. All of those are held in this figure. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning and diving and picking apart this text with me. This was a delight.